The morning I found the note, I was coming back from my usual walk along the trail behind Ridgecrest Drive. 6:15, maybe 6:20. The sun was barely clearing the tree line, and my knees were doing what they always do in November, reminding me I'm 63 and not 28. I had my earbuds in, listening to nothing in particular, just the sound of leaves under my boots. I unlocked the front door and it swung open without resistance. That was the first thing. I always have to push that door. The frame swelled 2 summers ago, and I never got around to fixing it. My former wife, I should say, used to remind me about it every few months. Leonard, that door. I'd nod, say I'd get to it. I never did. But that morning it opened like it had been oiled overnight. I stepped inside. The house smelled different. Not bad, just different. Like it had been cleaned or aired out while I was gone. I stood in the entryway for a moment, listening. Nothing. No coffee brewing. No television from the bedroom where she liked to watch the morning news while getting dressed. I walked to the kitchen. There was an envelope on the counter. White, letter-sized, my name written on the front in her handwriting. Not a card, not a sticky note. An envelope, sealed, like something you'd get from a lawyer's office. I stood there for probably 30 seconds before I opened it. Inside were 2 pages. The first was a letter. The second was a document I didn't fully understand until I read it 3 times. The letter said she was done. That she hadn't been happy for a long time. That she had found someone she connected with on a level she hadn't felt in years. She hoped I would understand. She wished me well. The document was a copy of a purchase agreement. For our house. Signed. Closing date, 6 weeks out. I sat down on the floor, not in a chair, on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, still holding both pages. I'm not sure how long I sat there. The refrigerator cycled on and off twice. At some point, the neighbor's dog started barking at something in the yard next door. I need to explain something about our house. We bought it together in 2004. Both names on the deed. I put in 40% of the down payment from savings I'd accumulated before we married. She matched the rest from an inheritance. Over the years, I handled every repair, every tax payment, every insurance renewal. She handled the interior, the furniture, the garden out back. We had built something together, or I believed we had. What I didn't know, what I learned that afternoon after I finally got up off that floor and started making phone calls, was that 6 months earlier, she had convinced me to sign what she described as an estate planning document. She sat me down at the dining room table on a Tuesday evening, told me our financial advisor had recommended we simplify how our assets were titled for probate purposes. She had a notary come to the house. I signed 3 pages without reading them carefully. One of those pages was a quitclaim deed. I had signed my share of the house over to her. I didn't know. I'm a retired civil engineer. I've read thousands of technical documents in my career. But that evening I trusted my wife of 19 years, and I did not read carefully, and I signed my own name off the property I had lived in and maintained and paid taxes on for 2 decades. When I called the county recorder's office that afternoon, they confirmed it. The deed had been recorded 4 months prior. The house was hers alone. The sale was completely legal. I called my son from the driveway. I was sitting in my truck because I didn't know where else to go. He was at work. He's a contractor up in Flagstaff. And he didn't answer. I left a voicemail that I'm fairly certain didn't make much sense. Then I drove to my brother-in-law's house. Not her brother. My brother. He lives about 20 minutes away in Mesa. And when I showed up at his door at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday, looking like I'd aged a decade overnight, he didn't ask questions. He just handed me a cup of coffee and sat down across from me at his kitchen table. "Talk," he said. So I talked. It took me about an hour to get through all of it. He listened. He's 8 years older than me, retired from the fire department, and he has the quality of certain men who've seen enough emergencies to know when not to speak. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You said she was with someone. Do you know who?" I did. His name was Clifford Boone. He had been my business partner for 11 years. Clifford and I had built a small civil engineering consulting firm together, starting in 24. We had met on a county infrastructure project when we were both working for separate firms, realized we had complementary skills, and decided to go independent. By 2019, we had 8 employees, a solid regional reputation, and a client list that included 3 county governments and a mid-sized commercial developer. I had put in the early capital, about $180,000 from my retirement savings, and had never asked him to repay it because I considered us equal partners and the returns had been more than fair. I had no idea how long they had been involved. Later I would learn it had been almost 2 years. Clifford was 51. He drove a truck that cost more than some people's houses. He coached youth baseball on weekends and had a way of making everyone in the room feel like he was their best friend. I had trusted him completely. I sat at my brother's kitchen table and I said out loud, for the first time, she used the estate planning cover to get my name off the house, and then they listed it. They've been planning this. My brother nodded slowly. So what are you going to do? I didn't have an answer that day, but I went home, back to the house that was no longer mine, and I started thinking. I want to be honest about that stretch of time. It was not clean or noble. I spent several nights unable to sleep past 3 in the morning. I sat in the dark in my home office and felt something I can only describe as a hollowness. Not rage, not grief exactly, but a kind of disorientation, like the floor had shifted and I didn't trust my footing. 19 years. I had built a life inside 19 years, and I had apparently been the only one who thought it was real. But I am a methodical person by nature. I solve problems with information and structure. And once the initial shock started to settle, I began to think methodically. The first thing I did was call my attorney. His name is not important, but I've used him for business matters for 15 years, and he is not the kind of man who wastes words. I told him the full situation. He listened without interrupting. The quitclaim was valid, he said. She owns the house, she can sell it. But you signed under misrepresentation. We can explore that. It'll take time and money, and I want you to think about whether that's where you want your energy. Tell me the rest, I said. The rest, he said, depends on what else you know. I thought about that for 3 days. What I knew was this. The consulting firm had a partnership agreement we had signed in 2013. It included a clause, standard, we had both agreed to it without much thought at the time, that neither partner could enter into contracts exceeding $50,000 without the written consent of the other. It also included a non-compete clause and provisions around the use of firm resources for outside business activities. I also knew that approximately 4 months before my wife left, Clifford had brought in a new commercial client, a real estate developer out of Scottsdale named Harlan Brock, and had handled the entire engagement himself. He told me Brock preferred to work with a single point of contact and that he'd keep me updated. I had trusted him and let it go. The total contract value, I discovered, when I finally looked through the firm's books properly, was $340,000. He had never gotten my written consent. I also discovered, with help from our firm's accountant, that Clifford had been using 2 firm employees, on the clock, on company time, to perform work related to a separate LLC he had formed 8 months earlier. The LLC was in his name alone. It provided consulting services, the same kind we provided at our firm. He'd been building a competing business with company resources while we were still partners. I did not confront him. I did not call him, text him, or send any communication that could be interpreted as threatening or emotional. I went to work every day that week and behaved exactly as I always had. We had coffee together on Thursday morning and talked about a drainage project we were bidding in Chandler. I looked at him across the conference table, and I thought about everything I now knew, and I said nothing. On Friday afternoon, I called my attorney and told him what I had found. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Leonard, do you still want to fight about the house?" "Not primarily," I said. "Good," he said, "because what you're describing with the firm is considerably more significant." We spent the next 3 weeks building a case. My attorney brought in a business litigation specialist, a woman I'll call by her title because she earned it, not her name, and together they pulled together the unauthorized contract, the employee time records, the LLC registration, and the financial trail showing revenue from his outside clients that overlapped directly with firm clients I had developed. Total damages, conservatively estimated, somewhere between $280,000 and $400,000, depending on how the court valued the diverted business opportunities. I also had my attorney quietly file a formal complaint about the quitclaim deed, citing misrepresentation in the signing process. We didn't expect to win that one outright, but we expected it to complicate her life considerably when the sale closed and proceeds were distributed. On the first Tuesday of December, a process server arrived at our firm's office while Clifford was meeting with a client. I was not there for that moment. My attorney had advised me not to be, but Audra, our office manager, called me afterward and said she had never seen Clifford's face do what it did in the 30 seconds after he was handed those documents. He called me 4 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again. And again. His wife called from a number I didn't recognize. I assumed she was trying because he told her, and she thought she could reason with me. My son called that evening because word had apparently reached people we both knew. 14 missed calls that day. I answered none of them. The next morning, I received an email from Clifford's personal attorney, a man who apparently specialized in business disputes and had a website with his face on it that made him look very confident. The email suggested that my claims were without merit and that pursuing them would be costly and time-consuming for all parties, and that his client was open to a good-faith conversation. I forwarded it to my attorney without comment. Here's what I want you to understand about the 3 months that followed, because I've seen other people tell versions of this story, and they tend to skip over the hard parts. Those months were not satisfying. They were grueling. There were depositions. There were document requests. There were invoices from my attorneys that made me close my laptop and sit very still for a few minutes. My wife had filed for divorce by then, and that proceeding was running parallel to the business litigation, like two rivers running alongside each other, occasionally flooding into the same territory. I am a private person. I am not someone who enjoys conflict. There were stretches of days where I genuinely questioned whether it was worth continuing. I had already lost the house in any practical sense. I had already lost the marriage. Fighting for the money felt on certain nights like trying to win an argument with someone who had already walked out of the room. But I kept thinking about what my attorney had said in our first meeting. He had asked me what I wanted, not what I was owed, not what was fair. What did I want? And I had said I wanted Clifford to not be able to walk away from what he'd done and pretend it hadn't happened. I wanted there to be a record somewhere that he had violated the trust of someone who had treated him as a brother for 11 years. I wanted consequences to be real. That, my attorney told me, was achievable. In March, 4 days before the scheduled trial date, Clifford's attorney called mine with a settlement offer. The number was $310,000. My attorney called me while I was at my brother's house, eating dinner. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember setting down my fork. I did not accept immediately. My attorney had told me not to, and also I genuinely needed to sit with it for 24 hours. I walked around my brother's neighborhood after dinner in the cold, and I thought about what $310,000 meant, and also what it didn't mean, and by the time I got back to his house, I knew what I was going to say. We accepted on the condition that the settlement include a written acknowledgement of the conduct that gave rise to the claims. Not a public statement, not an apology, but a private legal document in which Clifford's name was attached to a description of what he had done. His attorney pushed back. My attorney held firm. They agreed. The divorce was finalized the following month. Because of the quitclaim dispute, the court ordered that proceeds from the house sale be held in escrow, pending resolution of the misrepresentation claim. That claim eventually settled separately. She paid me back half the down payment I had originally contributed in 2004, plus interest. It was not everything, but it was recognition of something real. She has since moved in with Clifford, or so I'm told. I don't ask about it, and I don't look. I sold my share of the consulting firm, what remained of it after everything, to the 3 senior employees who had stayed through all of it. They're running it now under a new name. I heard they recently brought in a county contract in the East Valley. I'm glad for them. I live about 40 minutes from where I used to live, in a smaller house in a neighborhood where I know very few people. My son visits when he can. My brother comes for dinner on Sundays more often than not. I have the same walking trail I've always had, more or less. My knees still complain in November. People ask me sometimes, when I've told pieces of this story to people I trust, whether I regret not confronting them sooner, whether I wish I had screamed or broken something or made them face me directly. I don't. That's not who I am. And also, I don't think it would have given me anything I needed. What I needed was for what happened to be named accurately, for the record to reflect that my former wife convinced me to sign away my home under false pretenses, and that my business partner of 11 years used our company to build a competing business while pretending to sit next to me as an equal. I needed those things to be true in writing, somewhere, with their names on them. They are. I still have the note she left on the counter. I kept it, not for sentimental reasons. I don't feel sentimental about it. I kept it because it is, in the end, the most honest thing she ever said to me. There are no pretenses in it, no performance of affection. It says exactly what she wanted and nothing more. I wrote 2 words on the back of it the night I found it, before I put it in my desk drawer. I've told a few people about those 2 words, and most of them expect something dramatic, a threat, a vow, something cinematic. What I wrote was, already done. Not because I had a plan. I didn't have a plan that night. I wrote it because some part of me, the part that had been paying attention to small things for longer than I admitted, already knew that the life I thought I was living had been over for some time. I was the last to know, and now I wasn't. That was enough to start from. The trail behind my new neighborhood is not as long as the one behind Ridgecrest Drive, but it runs along a dry wash that fills with water when it rains, and in the early morning when there's nobody else out there, it is very quiet. I walk it 6 days a week. My knees manage. Some mornings I think about what I would say to my 63-year-old self on the morning I found that envelope on the counter, before he sat down on the kitchen floor and held those 2 pages and felt the ground go out from under him. I think I'd say, the ground comes back. It just takes a while, and when it does, it's yours. Actually yours this time. Nobody else's name on it. That's the part they didn't account for. I've thought a lot about why it all unraveled the way it did. Not just for me, for all of them. Clifford was smart, he was genuinely smart, and for a long time that intelligence served both of us well. But somewhere along the way, he started using it differently. He started pointing it inward, toward himself, toward what he could take rather than what he could build. He convinced himself, I think, that he was simply being practical, that this was just how things worked when you were ambitious enough to see an opportunity. He had spent 11 years watching me trust him completely. And at some point, that trust stopped looking like a partnership and started looking like a door left unlocked. That's the thing about betrayal by someone close. It rarely happens in a single moment. It accumulates quietly, decision by decision, each one small enough to rationalize, until one morning the accumulation is standing in your kitchen in the form of a sealed envelope with your name on it. What I've come to understand is that the choices people make don't stay contained to the person making them. Clifford's decision to siphon firm resources into his own LLC, to use the people I had helped hire, to divert clients I had spent years cultivating. Those choices had weight. They didn't disappear because he'd been careful about them. They left a record. Financial records, time logs, contract signatures, LLC filings. The truth of what he did was sitting in documents the whole time, patient, waiting for someone to look. That's what I mean when I say I believe in consequences that are earned rather than imposed. I didn't manufacture what happened to Clifford in that settlement. I didn't invent the violations. I found them. He had already built his own undoing. I just read the blueprints carefully. The same is true for my wife. She was not unintelligent. The quit-claim strategy was calculated. But she had miscalculated something important. She thought I would be too stunned, too heartbroken, too emotionally disorganized to act. She had watched me defer on the house repairs for years and concluded I was passive. She was wrong about what passivity was. I wasn't passive. I was trusting. Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters. What carried me through those months, the depositions, the invoices, the 3 o'clock mornings, was not anger. Anger would have burned out. What carried me was something quieter, a refusal to let the record stand uncorrected, a conviction that accuracy matters, that what actually happened deserves to be named accurately, with real names attached to real actions. My brother used to say that the people who survive hard things aren't necessarily the toughest or the angriest. They're the ones who stay methodical when everything around them is in chaos. I think he's right. I didn't win anything by raising my voice. I won by reading documents carefully, by asking the right questions, by holding still long enough to understand what I was actually dealing with before I moved. If I could say anything to someone sitting in a kitchen somewhere, holding a piece of paper that has just rearranged their understanding of their own life, I'd say this. The disorientation is real, and it takes time to pass, and you don't have to pretend otherwise, but underneath it, you still have the same mind you walked in with. That mind is your actual asset. Use it. The ground comes back. It just needs you to stay standing long enough to feel it.